Imagine losing everything, your home, your money, your future, not to an accident, but to the careful betrayal of the one person you trusted most. What would you do if the ashes of your old life were all you had left? Break or rebuild? This is the story of a woman who did not just survive. She rose from nothing and built an empire powerful enough to face the man who destroyed her. But when the moment of revenge finally came, the real battle was inside her heart. The day Adais discovered the betrayal was quiet. No storm, no warning. Just empty bank accounts, missing company shares, and a goodbye message from her husband. In one morning, her marriage, her wealth, and her future were gone. The morning started the way every Lagos morning had started for the past 9 years. Anadeze Okonkwo-Bello woke to the sound of generators humming on the street below, and the distant wail of a Danfo conductor announcing his route to no one in particular. Her apartment on the 23rd floor of Azuri Peninsula in Lekki Phase 1 sat high enough above the chaos that the city sounded almost peaceful from up there, like a prayer being said in a language she understood but had long since stopped needing to fear. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, checked the time, 6:14 a.m. She had beaten her alarm again. She always beat her alarm. She showered quickly, tied her jeel loosely as a head wrap the way her mother had taught her, a small Yoruba habit she carried into her Igbo husband's world without apology, and slipped into the navy suit jacket she had pressed the night before. Her husband, Emeka, had already left for what he called an early site inspection. He had been having a lot of those lately. She had not questioned it. She trusted him the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, without thinking about it, because the alternative was too terrible to consider. She had been wrong. By every measure Lagos respected, Adeze had made it. At 36, she co-owned Bellacrest Financial Advisory, a firm she and Emeka had built together on Victoria Island over 9 hard years, starting from a single rented office on Idowu Taylor Street with second-hand chairs and a printer that jammed every third page. They had grown it into one of the most respected mid-size advisory firms in Lagos, managing portfolios for oil executives, diaspora investors, and a growing number of new money entrepreneurs who had learned, as after one painful lesson too many, that they needed someone who understood both the numbers and the Nigerian market. Adeze understood both. She had grown up watching her Igbo father run a spare parts business in Aba with nothing but handshake deals and a notebook, and her Yoruba mother manage the household finances of 6 children with the precision of a central bank. Money was not a mystery to her, it was a language, and she had become fluent. Emeka Bello had brought the charm and the connections. His family name opened doors in Abuja, his father's network reached into the CBN's corridors, and his ability to walk into any room and make every man in it feel like his closest friend was something Adais had watched with quiet admiration for years. Together, they had been unstoppable. Their apartment in Lekki, and their weekend trips to Transcorp Hilton. The framed photo on her office wall, the two of them at Bellacrest's 5-year anniversary dinner at Echo Hotel, champagne flutes raised, her in burgundy lace, him in an agbada the color of midnight, both of them smiling the smiles of people who have climbed far and still plan to climb further. Nobody saw what was coming. Not even her. She noticed it first in the numbers. A Thursday morning in July. The kind of Lagos morning where the Harmattan dust that had blown in overnight sat on every glass surface like a fine grief. Adeze arrived at the office early, settled at her desk with a cup of Babadudu tea her secretary Ngozi kept stocked, and opened the firm's primary operating account to review a transfer she had authorized the week before. The balance on her screen stopped her cold, and she refreshed the page. Same number. She checked the secondary account, the joint business reserve, then the personal joint account she and Emeka had held since their 2nd year of marriage at GT Bank. One by one, the pages loaded with the same quiet catastrophe, balances stripped to near zero, Not emptied in a panic, not drained overnight in one suspicious transaction. Moved carefully, methodically, in amounts calibrated to stay beneath the thresholds that trigger bank alerts, spread over 6 weeks, routed through a company name she did not recognize. Okafor Bello Holdings Limited, registered in Emeka's mother's maiden name. 3 months ago. Someone who had helped her build every layer of this financial structure had spent 3 months quietly and legally dismantling it. Adaizi's hands did not shake. She was past shaking. Then her body understood before her mind caught up that this was not an error. This was architecture. His message was in her email, not her phone. She would have seen it too soon. Her business email, time-stamped 3:52 in the morning, sent from a Gmail account she had never seen before. It was 5 sentences long. Ada, by the time you read this, the transfers will be complete and the share documents will have been processed. I have engaged a lawyer. The signatures are in order. I want you to know I did not decide this in anger. I have been planning this for 18 months. Do not try to reach me. That was all. No one. No my love, no apology wrapped in Igbo proverb, the way he used to soften difficult things. Just 5 clean sentences and a name she had never once heard him use for her. Ada, short and final as a door closing. Then she sat in her office chair and read it 3 times. She was looking, she realized, for the version that did not mean what it meant. She did not find it. 18 months. He had sat across from her at Sunday jollof rice and passed her chin-chin from the bowl between them and said, I love you, a daisy in the dark of their bedroom, and reviewed quarterly reports beside her and shaken clients' hands as her partner for 18 months, while quietly, precisely, legally taking everything. Lagos does not pause for your grief. That is the first thing she remembered. She called Chukwuemeka Eze, the lawyer her father had introduced her to years ago, a sharp Anambra man with a gray beard and no patience for self-pity. He listened without interrupting, asked 3 questions, and told her what she feared. The transfers were structured to look legal. And the signature would require forensic verification and litigation that could take 2 years. Emeka had not made mistakes because Emeka was not a careless man. She left the office at noon. She took an Uber because her company car, an Innoson SUV she had been proud of in a way she had never admitted aloud, was gone. The registration quietly transferred alongside everything else. She sat in the back of a Corolla that smelled of air freshener and old leather, watching the Third Mainland Bridge traffic crawl, watching Lagos do what Lagos always does, continue loudly, indifferently, magnificently. And somewhere between the bridge and Ojota, with hawkers weaving between cars selling pure water and phone chargers, and a man in a tattered Arsenal jersey shouting into the window about business opportunities, the first tear came. She let it come, and she let 7 more follow. Then she pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes, exhaled slowly the way her grandmother used to exhale before she said something that mattered, and looked out at the city again. She had nothing. Less than nothing. There would be debts by the end of the week. But she had built Bellacrest from 2 second-hand chairs and a jamming printer. She had done it once in a city that bets against women who try. She would do it again. And this time, she would build something he could never touch. Would you forgive someone who planned your destruction? Or would you rise stronger than before? Subscribe to follow Adaizi's journey. From deep loss, a quiet fire began to grow. Adaiz worked small jobs, studied at night, and slowly built new skills in silence. And nobody knew the broken woman was becoming something powerful. The first thing Lagos took from her after Emeka took everything else was her pride. Not in the dramatic way people imagine when they picture a woman falling from wealth. There was no single moment of public humiliation, no scene in a restaurant where a card was declined in front of a table full of people who mattered. It was quieter than that. It was the morning she woke up in her cousin Tolu's spare bedroom in Surulere, the room that smelled of camphor balls and old curtains. and lay still for 4 minutes listening to the sound of Tolu's children arguing over Milo before school, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that this was now her life. She was 36 years old. She had co-owned a firm worth hundreds of millions of naira, and she was sleeping in a room the size of her old walk-in wardrobe, eating ajige bread and groundnut for breakfast, because she could not bring herself to spend Tolu's money on more than her share. She allowed herself 2 weeks of grief. She had earned those 2 weeks. Then she folded it away. The first job she took was data entry at a small insurance company in Ikeja. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 11,000 naira per week. The kind of work she used to assign to entry-level staff without looking up from her own desk. She sat in a row of 6 young graduates, most of them fresh from NYSC, wearing clothes that still had the optimism of people who had not yet been disappointed by the Nigerian job market. She was older than all of them. She said nothing about her background. She showed up at 7:50 every morning. I did the work cleanly and left without conversation. At night, after Tolu's children were asleep and the compound had settled into the particular Lagos quiet that is never fully quiet, Adaiz sat at the small table by the window with her second-hand laptop, bought for 12,000 naira from a boy in the market who swore the battery lasted 4 hours. It lasted 2, and she studied. She enrolled in every free course she could find. Financial modeling on Coursera, business law fundamentals from a Nigerian legal education platform her old colleague Said had mentioned once in passing, Excel macros, Power BI, corporate restructuring strategies. She was not learning things she did not know. She was building a new architecture for what she already understood. Deeper, cleaner, hers alone, with no partner's name attached to any of it. That her cousin Tolu Adeyemi was a Yoruba woman married to an Igbo accountant named Obinna, and she ran her household with the cheerful iron authority of someone who had decided long ago that complaining was a waste of her time. She never once asked Adayeze how long she planned to stay. She never made the room feel borrowed. She cooked extra portions without announcing it and left them covered on the stove, and when Adayeze tried to thank her on the 3rd week, Tolu waved her hand as if the gratitude was an insect bothering her. "You would do the same," Tolu said simply, and went back to braiding her daughter's hair. It was the most important thing anyone said to Adaiz in the first year, not because it was comforting, because it was true. And in a season when Emeka's betrayal had made her question every judgment she had ever made about people, the simple certainty of Tolu's faith in her was the first solid ground she had felt beneath her feet since the morning everything disappeared. She did not waste it. 8 months after moving into Tolu's spare room, Adaize registered a business name. She did it at the CAC office in Alausa on a Wednesday morning, standing in a line that moved the way Lagos government lines always move, with determined slowness, as if the system itself was testing who among those waiting actually wanted it badly enough. She waited 2 hours and 40 minutes. When the clerk finally called her forward and processed her registration form, she paid the fee in cash from a small envelope she had been adding to for 3 months and walked out into the Alausa sun holding a certificate that said, Adaiz Consulting and Financial Services, sole proprietor. It was not Bella Crest, it was not Victoria Island, it was a business name and a phone number and a second-hand laptop with a 2-hour battery. But it was hers. Fully, legally, irrevocably hers. Registered in her father's name, Okonkwo, not her husband's. She stood outside the CAC gate for a moment, holding the certificate in both hands, and said nothing. There were no tears. There was something quieter and more durable than tears. A door closing on the woman she used to be and opening onto the one she was becoming. Her first client was a woman named Blessing Okiki, a trader from Onitsha who had expanded into Lagos and was drowning in the gap between her turnover and her take-home, watching money move through her business like water through cupped hands. Someone in their old church had whispered Adaizi's name. Yet Blessing called on a Sunday evening, skeptical, her voice carrying the careful guardedness of a woman who had been let down by professionals before. Adaiz spent 3 hours on her books. She found 6 places where Blessing was losing money without knowing it. She restructured her supplier payment cycle, identified 2 tax exposures, and showed her in a 1-page summary written in plain English and Igbo-inflected clarity exactly where every naira was going and why. Blessing stared at the page for a long time. Then she looked up. "How much do you charge?" Adaiz named a figure she had decided on the night before, modest enough to be accessible, high enough to signal that her work had value. Blessing did not negotiate. She paid by transfer before she left the table. It was the first money Adaiz had earned entirely on her own terms since Bellacrest was born. It felt different from any money she had earned before. It felt like proof. Blessing referred 3 people within a month. Those 3 referred others. Adaiz worked every referral with the same focus she had once given to 100 million naira portfolios, because she understood something now that she had not fully understood before. Every small thing done well is a foundation. And she was building this one stone by stone on ground no one else had touched. Nobody in Lagos knew what she was doing. That was deliberate. The people who had known her at Bellacrest assumed she had been destroyed. Some felt sorry for her in the distracted way of people who have their own problems. Some, she suspected, quietly believed she had deserved it in some vague, unspecified way that women are sometimes blamed for the ambitions of the men who betray them. She did not correct any of them. She did not post on LinkedIn. She did not appear at the industry events she used to attend on Amika's arm. She was invisible, and she chose it the way a hunter chooses stillness, not from fear, but from patience. 2 years passed. Then 3. The spare room in Surulere became a 1-bedroom flat in Yaba. The 1-bedroom flat became a small office on Bode Thomas Street. The client list grew from 1 page to 4. She hired her first staff member, a sharp young Edo girl named Esohe, fresh from university, who reminded her so much of herself at 22 that it sometimes made her chest ache. The woman who had wept in the back of a Corolla on the 3rd mainland bridge still existed somewhere inside her. Adaiz had not buried her. She had put her to work. Every morning, she opened her laptop. She looked at the numbers. And she built, quietly, invisibly, unstoppably. Real strength is slow and invisible. She was not loud about her rising. She was not in a hurry. She was not doing this for applause. She was doing this because the alternative, staying broken, was not something she was willing to give Emeka Bello the satisfaction of witnessing. And Lagos, the city that had not paused for her grief, was about to feel her footsteps again. She did not scream. She did not chase him. She built power so quietly the world never saw it coming. Years later, Adaiz owned companies across Nigeria and beyond, while the man who betrayed her was slowly losing everything. There is a specific kind of silence that belongs to a woman who has made up her mind. It is not the silence of someone who has given up. It is not the silence of defeat or resignation or buried grief. It is something altogether different. The silence of absolute focus, of a person who has decided that every word spoken, every naira spent, every hour given must serve one purpose and one purpose only. Adaiz had worn that silence for 5 years. And in those 5 years, while Lagos continued its loud and magnificent chaos around her, she had been building something that no one who had known her at Bellacrest would have believed possible. Not because they doubted her intelligence, but because they had no idea how far her hunger went. It began, as most real pivots do, not with a grand announcement, but with a single conversation. Year 4 of her rebuilding. Adaiz was seated in a modest conference room in Marina, borrowed from a legal firm whose partner owed her a favor, presenting a full financial restructuring proposal to Alhaji Musa Dangana, a Hausa Fulani commodities trader from Kano whose Lagos operations had been bleeding quietly for 18 months. His accountant had told him the problem was the market. His lawyer had told him the problem was regulation. Adaiz had spent 3 weeks in his books and found the problem was neither. It was internal, it was structural, and it was fixable. She walked him through the proposal for 40 minutes without notes, in the calm, unhurried way of someone who does not need to perform certainty because they actually have it. Alhaji Dangana was a man who had been in Lagos business long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and competence. He had met enough of the former. He was looking at the latter. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in the measured Hausa-accented English of a man who chooses words deliberately, "You are the kind of person I have been trying to find for 6 years. What will it take to make you my permanent financial director?" Adaiz did not accept his offer. She made him a counter-proposal instead. She would not be his employee. She would be his strategic partner. A 15% equity stake in his Lagos subsidiary in exchange for a 2-year restructuring mandate. He laughed. And then he looked at her face and stopped laughing. They signed the agreement 3 weeks later in the same borrowed conference room. That partnership became the first foundation stone of what would eventually be called the AO Group. People in Lagos tell stories about wealth the way they tell stories about everything else. With drama, with overnight revelations, with a single lucky phone call that changed everything. The truth of how Adaiz built what she built was less cinematic and far more formidable. It was accumulated judgment, years of reading rooms correctly, understanding which partnerships to accept and which to walk away from, knowing when to be generous and when to be immovable. It was the reputation she built one client at a time. Not by being the cheapest or the flashiest, but by being the one whose projections came true, and whose advice held up when the market turned ugly, whose loyalty did not waver when a more lucrative client came calling. By year 5, Adaiz Consulting had become AO Financial Services Limited, registered on Victoria Island, the same street where Bellacrest had once stood. By year 6, she had absorbed 2 smaller firms whose founders were ready to exit and whose client bases fit her vision like pieces of a design she had been sketching for years. By year 7, AO Group was incorporated as a holding company with 3 subsidiaries: financial advisory, real estate investment, and a microfinance arm she built specifically to serve market women and small traders. The Blessing Okikis of Nigeria, the people the formal banking sector had spent decades politely ignoring. She hired Sohei as head of operations and watched the young Edo woman grow into the role with the quiet ferocity of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of chance. She brought in Chidi Nwachukwu, a Rivers State man with a forensic accounting background and an uncanny ability to find value where others saw only liability. She partnered with Fatima Aliyu, a sharp Kaduna-based lawyer whose knowledge of northern Nigeria's business landscape made AO Group the first southern-headquartered firm to build genuine infrastructure in Kano and Kaduna simultaneously. The AO Group was not a Lagos company that occasionally did business in the north. It was a Nigerian company. That distinction, small as it sounded, opened doors that had been closed to every competitor who had not thought to knock on them. She did not track Emeka. She had made that decision deliberately in the first year, to spend no energy, not a single afternoon, not a single sleepless hour, monitoring the man who had taken everything from her. Energy given to watching someone else's fall was energy stolen from building her own rise, and she could not afford that exchange. But Lagos is a small city in the ways that matter. Information finds you. It was Ngozi, her old secretary from Bellacrest, now working at a firm in Ikoyi, who first mentioned, carefully, over jollof rice at a quick lunch in 2019, that Bellacrest had been struggling. The firm Emeka had stolen and renamed Hargrove Bello Capital was bleeding clients. His connections, it turned out, were borrowed credibility, built on his father's name and sustained by Adizi's competence. Without her, the intelligence behind the charm had nowhere to land. By the time AO Group was profiled in Business Day as one of the fastest-growing financial services groups in Nigeria, Hargrove Bello Capital had quietly lost 4 of its 7 major clients. Emeka had leveraged the stolen assets to fund an oil and gas venture that collapsed 18 months in. He had sold the Lekki apartment. He had, by all accounts Addis received without asking for them, become a man chasing the ghost of a success he had not built and could not sustain. She did not celebrate when she heard these things. She noted them, filed them away in the calm part of her mind that had always been her strongest instrument. And she kept building. It was a tender that brought them back into the same orbit. The Lagos state government had opened a competitive process for a financial advisory consortium to manage a new infrastructure investment fund, a 2 billion naira vehicle that would be one of the largest publicly managed pools of capital in the state's recent history. Every firm of consequence in Lagos had submitted a proposal. AO Group's submission was 47 pages of the most precise, credible, and comprehensive financial strategy the evaluation committee said they had seen in a decade of managing such processes. That assessment came from the committee chair himself, a retired central bank director named Professor Abiodun Coker, who called Adaizi personally to tell her. Hargrove Bello Capital had also submitted a proposal. Adaizi did not know this until she arrived at the final presentation shortlist and saw the firm's name on the board beside hers. She stood in the corridor of the Lagos State Secretariat in Alausa and looked at the name for 3 full seconds. Then she straightened her jacket, the way her mother used to straighten her wrapper before entering a room that required her best self, and walked through the door. Emeka was already inside. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. The color shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly, and not fear exactly, but something between the two that had no clean name. Something that looked, Adez thought, very much like a man understanding for the first time the full size of what he had thrown away. She gave him a single, even nod. The nod of a woman who has nothing to prove and nowhere to hurry. Then she took her seat, opened her portfolio, and prepared to win. If you had the power to face the one who broke you, would you choose revenge? Or something greater? Subscribe before the final confrontation. They meet again in a boardroom, but the power has changed hands. He is desperate. She is unstoppable. The Lagos State Government boardroom on the 4th floor of the Secretariat in Alausa was not a glamorous room. It had the particular austerity of Nigerian government spaces, the long table with mismatched chairs, the wall-mounted air conditioning unit that worked at full blast or not at all, the framed photograph of the governor looking statesmanlike above a bookshelf of reports nobody had opened in years. A water dispenser stood in the corner. A projector screen hung at one end. Outside the windows, not the Alausa government estate sprawled in the midday heat, roof after dusty roof, generators humming beneath every building because NEPA had not changed its habits and no one expected it to. Adaizi had presented first. 45 minutes. Clean slides, precise numbers, a delivery so confident and unhurried that 2 of the 5 evaluation committee members had leaned forward without noticing they were doing it. Professor Abiodun Coker, seated at the center of the table, had asked 3 penetrating questions. She had answered all 3 before he finished the sentences. She was gathering her materials at the end of the table when Emeka walked in for his own presentation slot and saw her still in the room. She took him in quickly, the way you take in a space you used to live in and find altered, not unrecognizable, but rearranged in ways that tell a story without words. Emeka Bello at 43 was still handsome, The agbada he wore was quality fabric, well sewn, the deep green of a man who still understood presentation. But the fabric was doing work that the man beneath it was no longer doing on his own. There were shadows under his eyes that concealed foundation could not fully hide. His shoulders carried a subtle forward curve, the posture of someone who had been bracing against something for a long time. The easy, expansive confidence that had once filled every room he entered had contracted. What remained was its outline. He crossed the room toward her before she could leave. She had expected this. She had prepared for it the way you prepare for Harmattan, not by trying to stop it, but by deciding in advance what you will and will not allow it to do to you. Adeze. Her name in his mouth. She had wondered in idle moments years ago what it would feel like to hear it again. Now she knew. It felt like nothing, not numbness. Numbness is the absence of feeling. This was something more complete. The feeling of a wound that has fully healed and left no tenderness behind. Emeka, she said, even, measured, the voice of a woman conducting business. He had clearly rehearsed something. She could tell by the way the words came out slightly too smooth, like a man reciting rather than speaking. He said he needed to talk to her. He said he knew he had no right to ask. He said there were things he wanted to explain, things he wanted her to understand about the position he had been in, the pressure from his family, the decisions that had felt necessary at the time and that he had regretted every day since. She let him finish. She owed him that much. Not for his sake, but for her own. She had always believed that the quality of how you listen to someone tells you more about yourself than about them. When he stopped, she asked one question. "What is it you actually want, Emeka?" The smoothness broke. Beneath it was what she had suspected, a man in genuine trouble. Hargrove Bellow Capital was effectively finished. The last 2 anchor clients had withdrawn in the same month. The debt he had accumulated to fund the failed oil venture had matured, and the creditors were no longer patient. He needed a lifeline. And he needed a partner with standing and capital who could absorb what remained of his firm, or at minimum co-sign a restructuring arrangement that would give him time. He had come to the tender hoping to win it. He had found Adeze there instead. And somewhere in the calculation of a desperate man, he had decided that she was the only person in Lagos who might still help him. He said he was asking her for a chance. The room was very quiet. The air conditioning labored. Outside, a generator kicked on somewhere below with a groan and then a steady hum. She did not answer immediately. She looked at him for a long moment, not with cruelty, not with the performative coldness of a woman enjoying a reversal of fortune, with something harder to describe, the look of a person who is deciding in real time what kind of woman she is, and because the past was in the room. She had not invited it, but here it came anyway. The morning she found the empty accounts, the 4 sentences in her email, the Uber ride across the 3rd mainland bridge, the spare room in Tolu's house smelling of camphor balls, the second-hand laptop that lasted 2 hours, the CAC queue in Alausa that had tested who truly wanted it. All of it rose up at once, not as pain exactly, but as weight. The full inventory of what his 18 months of planning had cost her. She thought about Esohe, who had never been given a chance until Adeze gave her one. She thought about Blessing Okeke from Onitsha, who had cried at the end of their first meeting, not from sadness but from relief, because someone had finally seen her business clearly and told her the truth. And she thought about the microfinance arm and the market women in Mushin and Oshodi, who now had access to capital that the big banks had spent decades deciding they did not deserve. She thought about who she had become, not despite Emeka's betrayal, not in spite of it, through it. The woman she was now had been forged in the specific fire of that specific destruction, and she was not sure, sitting in this too-cold government boardroom looking at the wreckage of the man who had lit the match. that she would trade the woman she had become for the life she had lost. That realization landed quietly. It did not announce itself. It simply settled. The part of her that had learned to fight wanted to say no, wanted to look him in the eye and let him understand, without drama, without raised voice, that she owed him absolutely nothing, and that the accounts he had drained had funded the journey that had made her this, that the greatest thing he had ever done for her was betray her. The part of her that had learned to build asked a different question, not what he deserved, what she, Adeze Okonkwo-Bello, CEO of AO Group, mother of something larger than herself, wanted to do with this moment. Not for him, for herself, for the kind of woman she had spent 7 years choosing to become. She looked at Emeka for the last time with the eyes of a woman who is about to make a decision that has nothing to do with him. Then she picked up her portfolio from the table, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Did not turn around fully. Just enough. "I will think about it," she said. Not a yes, not a no, not mercy and not cruelty. Simply a woman who had earned the right to take her time. She walked out into the Alausa afternoon, into the heat and the generator hum and the beautiful, relentless noise of Lagos continuing without permission. And she carried the weight of the decision inside her chest, and for the first time in 7 years, it felt less like a wound and more like a choice. True victory is not always hurting back. The real battle was never in that boardroom. It had always been inside her.